In the small Bavarian town of Herzogenaurach, where cobblestone streets curl around narrow houses and the sound of factory whistles once dictated the rhythm of daily life, two brothers were born into a world that would soon collapse around them. Adolf Dassler arrived first, quiet, introspective, mechanical in his thinking, a boy who preferred tools to conversation and machines to people. 2 years later came Rudolf Dassler, charismatic, impulsive. A born negotiator who could sell conviction as easily as he could sell shoes. They grew up in a Germany still trembling from the shock of industrialization, a nation caught between tradition and modernity, pride and poverty, ambition and despair. Their father worked long hours in a shoe factory for barely enough to keep food on the table. Their mother ran a small laundry business, scrubbing the clothes of wealthier families who passed through town on bicycles and horse-drawn carts. The Dassler home was modest, cramped, and perpetually filled with the smell of soap, leather, and damp cloth. It was a childhood shaped by scarcity, where every object had value and every resource had to be reused, repurposed, reimagined. The First World War did not simply pass through Germany. It ripped it open. When Adolf and Rudolf were drafted into the German army, they left behind a country that would no longer exist in the same form when they returned. The war destroyed the German economy, shattered its pride, and left behind a generation of men who had learned discipline, obedience, and survival under extreme pressure. When the brothers returned home, they found their mother's laundry business in ruins. Customers were gone, money was gone, electricity was unreliable, raw materials were scarce. Germany was drowning in inflation, desperation, and humiliation. For many families, survival became an act of daily improvisation. Adolf Dassler did not dream of becoming rich. He dreamed of making something better. From an early age, he had been fascinated by athletics, by the mechanics of movement, by the way the human body interacted with the ground beneath it. In a time when most athletes wore heavy leather boots regardless of sport, Adolf saw inefficiency everywhere. He believed that performance could be engineered, that speed could be designed, that victory could be manufactured. And, in the backyard of his mother's failed laundry shed, he began to build a workshop out of whatever he could find. There was no capital. There were no investors. There were no supply chains, so Adolf scavenged. He walked old battlefields looking for scraps of leather from discarded helmets. He collected canvas from broken tents. He pulled fabric from parachutes that had fallen from the sky years earlier. He dismantled military equipment for metal pieces that could become spikes. He turned a bicycle into a power generator by attaching a leather trimmer to its wheel and asking a friend to pedal while he worked. In a country struggling to rebuild itself from rubble, Adolf Dassler built shoes from the remains of war. These were not ordinary shoes. They were light. They were flexible. They were designed for speed. Adolf obsessed over every stitch, every angle, every ounce of weight. He experimented with materials, redesigned soles, tested prototypes on local runners. Word spread through Herzogenaurach that there was a man who could make you faster, a man who could give you an edge, a man whose shoes could change the outcome of a race. And slowly, orders began to come in. Rudolf watched his younger brother work with fascination. Where Adolf was silent and mechanical, Rudolf was expressive and persuasive. He understood people. He understood desire. He understood ambition. And he saw something in Adolf's workshop that could become far more than a hobby. He quit his job and joined his brother, taking on the role of salesman while Adolf remained in the workshop refining his designs. Together, they formed a partnership built on contrast. One created, the other convinced. One engineered, the other negotiated, one stayed in the shadows. The other stepped into the spotlight. In 1924, the Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory was officially founded. At first, it was nothing more than a modest operation run out of a converted laundry shed. But Germany was changing. Sport was becoming a national obsession. Athletics represented discipline, strength, unity. Running clubs were forming across the country. Football was gaining popularity. Physical fitness was being promoted as a civic duty. The Dassler brothers were in the right place at the right time, offering a product that perfectly aligned with a nation searching for identity through performance. Rudolf traveled relentlessly, visiting sports clubs, schools, and athletic associations. He gave away free pairs of shoes to promising athletes, knowing that once they experienced the difference, they would never go back. Adolf refined his designs relentlessly, improving grip, reducing weight, optimizing balance. Demand grew. The brothers moved into a larger factory. They hired workers, they expanded into football boots. Their shoes began appearing on tracks and pitches across Germany. And then Germany itself transformed. In 1933, the nation entered a new era defined by ideology, propaganda, and militarization. The Nazi regime elevated sport into a symbol of national superiority. Physical fitness was no longer just a personal pursuit, it was a political statement. Athletic excellence became proof of racial ideology. Stadiums filled. Youth programs expanded. Sporting organizations received state support. And with this explosion of state-sponsored athletics came an unprecedented demand for sports equipment. The Dassler brothers joined the Nazi Party. For some, this was a pragmatic decision. For others, ideological alignment. Rudolf was vocal in his support of the regime. Adolf was less outspoken, but deeply involved in the Hitler Youth program. Their business flourished under the new government. Contracts increased, production scaled, the factory expanded. Their shoes became synonymous with German athletic excellence. But their defining moment came in 1936, when Berlin hosted the Olympic Games. This was not just a sporting event. It was a global propaganda spectacle. The first Olympics ever broadcast on television. Hitler's vision of Aryan supremacy was to be displayed before the world. Germany was meant to dominate. German athletes were meant to triumph. And the Dassler brothers saw an opportunity unlike any other. They wanted the best athlete on earth to wear their shoes. His name was Jesse Owens, an African-American sprinter whose talent shattered world records and whose presence alone challenged Nazi racial ideology. Sponsoring Owens was risky. Supporting a black athlete could anger the regime. It could jeopardize their business. But Adolf Dassler believed in performance above politics. He traveled to the Olympic Village and met Owens in person. He showed him his shoes. Lightweight, spiked, engineered for speed. Owens accepted them. And then, before the eyes of the world, Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals. Every sprint, every jump, every victory was achieved wearing Dassler shoes. Hitler refused to shake his hand. Nazi propaganda collapsed under the weight of undeniable excellence. And the Dassler brand was catapulted into global fame. Orders flooded in from Europe, the United States, and beyond. Their shoes were no longer just German products. They were symbols of victory. But beneath the success, the brotherhood was beginning to fracture. The factory was busier than ever. The pressure was immense. Decisions carried enormous financial consequences. And the brothers disagreed on almost everything. Rudolf believed sales drove the business. Adolf believed product was king. Rudolf wanted to expand aggressively. Adolf wanted perfection. Their personalities, once complementary, became combustible. When World War II erupted, everything escalated. The factory was converted into a manufacturer of boots and weapons for the German army. Adolf controlled production. Rudolf was drafted into military service. Paranoia took hold. Rudolf became convinced that Adolf was pushing him out, that his brother wanted to control the business alone, that every decision was part of a larger betrayal. They lived in the same house with their wives and children. Arguments became constant. Resentment fermented. Then one night, during an Allied bombing raid, the families fled to the basement. When Adolf entered and saw Rudolf already there, he muttered, "The bastards are back again." Adolf claimed he meant the bombers. Rudolf believed he meant him and his wife. From that moment on, the relationship collapsed. Rudolf accused Adolf of hoarding leather. Adolf was interrogated by Nazi authorities. Rudolf was sent to the front. Rudolf accused Adolf of turning him in. After the war, Rudolf was arrested by American forces for suspected Nazi collaboration. He spent a year in a prisoner of war camp, convinced his brother had betrayed him. Adolf faced his own trial for war profiteering. Rudolf testified against him. By the time both men were cleared, the bond between them was dead. They were no longer brothers. They were enemies. In 1948, the Dassler Empire was torn in two. Adolf took the factory on one side of the river and named his new company Adidas. Rudolf crossed the river and founded Puma. Their hometown split in half. Families chose sides. Schools divided. Businesses aligned. Dating across the river became taboo. People looked down at each other's shoes before deciding whether to speak. Herzogenaurach became known as the town of bent necks. What began as a family feud became a corporate war. And this war would shape the future of global sport, marketing, and culture itself. Adidas and Puma were no longer just companies. They were ideologies. They were identities. They were symbols of allegiance. They represented two visions of power born from the same bloodline and fueled by the same obsession. The rivalry would define sponsorship, revolutionize sports marketing, rewrite the economics of athletic influence, and turn shoes into instruments of global persuasion. Two brothers who once built shoes from scraps of war would now build empires from the psychology of victory. And neither would ever forgive the other. In the years following the split, Herzogenaurach no longer felt like a single town. It felt like two rival city-states locked in permanent Cold War. On one side of the Aurach River stood Adidas. On the other stood Puma. The river was no longer just water. It was a border, a psychological boundary, a line that separated families, friendships, loyalties, and futures. Workers crossed bridges with caution. Shop owners displayed only one brand, children learned early which side they belonged to. The air itself seemed charged with rivalry, as if the town had become a living monument to a feud that refused to die. Adolf Dassler rebuilt his empire with methodical precision. Adidas was not a company built on loud promises. It was built on obsessive engineering. Adolf believed that if he could give athletes even a 1% advantage, they would win, and when they won, the world would follow. He surrounded himself with technicians, shoemakers, biomechanical thinkers. His factory became a laboratory where every stitch was tested, every sole refined, every gram measured. For Adolf, shoes were not fashion. They were instruments of performance. Rudolf Dassler, by contrast, rebuilt Puma with fire. Where Adolf sought quiet domination through innovation, Rudolf pursued loud conquest through charisma. Puma's offices were filled with salesmen, negotiators, marketers. Rudolf believed that perception created reality. If Puma could appear dominant, it would become dominant. He was aggressive, confrontational, relentless. He did not wait for opportunity. He forced it into existence. The two companies mirrored their founders. Adidas was disciplined, engineered, controlled. Puma was fast, loud, fearless. The rivalry escalated into full-scale corporate warfare. Each major sporting event became a battlefield. Each elite athlete became a weapon. Sponsorship deals turned into strategic operations. Contracts were guarded like state secrets. Poaching attempts were constant. Legal threats were routine. The goal was not just to win market share. It was to humiliate the enemy. And then came the World Cup. In 1954, West Germany returned to the global stage after the devastation of war. The nation was still rebuilding. Cities lay in ruins. Families mourned millions of dead. Pride was fractured. Identity was fragile. The national football team carried more than expectations. It carried the emotional weight of an entire country desperate for redemption. The team qualified for the World Cup final against Hungary, the most dominant football force in the world. Hungary had not lost a match in 4 years. Their players were legends. Their tactics were revolutionary. Their confidence was absolute. West Germany were underdogs in every sense. But Adolf Dassler had been preparing. He had developed a revolutionary football boot with screw-in studs that could be adjusted depending on weather conditions. At a time when boots had fixed studs, Adidas players could change their grip mid-match. It was a small detail. A mechanical tweak. But Adolf understood something deeper. He understood that football matches are not decided only by skill. They are decided by control, by traction, by stability, by the ability to stay upright when the ground turns against you. On the day of the final, rain began to fall. The pitch turned into mud. Hungarian players slipped. Their elegant passing game collapsed into chaos. But the German players, wearing Adidas boots with longer studs, moved with confidence. They ran. They turned, they attacked, Germany scored. Then again. Then, against every prediction, they took the lead. When the final whistle blew, West Germany were world champions. The miracle of Bern became one of the most important moments in German cultural history. It was more than a football match. It was a psychological rebirth. For the first time since the war, Germany felt pride again. And Adidas was woven into that moment forever. Adolf Dassler became a national hero. Demand exploded. Orders flooded in from every corner of Europe. Adidas boots became symbols of resilience, innovation, and victory. The 3 stripes were no longer just decoration. They were a badge of legitimacy. For Rudolf Dassler, it was a devastating blow. He had tried to secure the German team. He had known the coach personally. Negotiations had failed. He had miscalculated. And Adolf had seized the moment. The wound cut deep. It was not just a business loss, it was a personal humiliation. From that moment on, the rivalry intensified. Adidas and Puma raced to sponsor every rising star. They chased Olympic champions, football icons, track legends. They turned athletes into walking billboards. They transformed shoes into marketing weapons. They created a new era where victory and branding became inseparable. And then the sons entered the war. Horst Dassler, Adolf's son, inherited his father's obsession with control and strategy. He was brilliant, calculating, and ruthless. He understood that sport was not just competition. It was theater, it was politics, it was media. He would go on to become one of the most powerful figures in sports marketing history. Armin Dassler, Rudolf's son, inherited his father's hunger for dominance. He was bold, aggressive, and fearless in negotiation. He believed Puma could overtake Adidas through sheer force of will. The feud did not die with the brothers. It mutated. By the late 1960s, Adidas and Puma were spending enormous sums to sign elite athletes. They flew stars around the world. They hosted lavish dinners. They built personal relationships. They created bidding wars that drove prices to absurd levels. Sponsorship was no longer about product, it was about influence. But the escalation was becoming unsustainable. Before the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, Horst and Armin made a secret pact. There was one man both companies wanted more than any other: Pelé, the most famous footballer on earth, a living legend, a global icon. If either Adidas or Puma signed Pelé, it would change the balance of power forever. But both sons knew that if they entered a bidding war, they would destroy their own companies. So they agreed. Pelé would be off limits. Neither Adidas nor Puma would sign him. The pact was sealed in silence. Then the World Cup began. Brazil advanced through the tournament with Pelé as their star. Cameras followed his every move. Millions watched. And just before kickoff in a crucial match, Pelé walked onto the pitch, stopped, knelt down, and tied his shoelaces. For several seconds, the world stared at his boots. They were Puma. The betrayal was absolute. Puma had secretly signed Pelé for a fortune. And they had orchestrated the most perfect product placement in sports history. In a single moment, Puma appeared on millions of television screens around the globe. Pelé went on to lead Brazil to victory. Puma boots became bestsellers overnight. Adidas was blindsided. The pact was dead. The war was back. The feud consumed everything. By the late 1970s, both companies were obsessed with beating each other rather than serving customers. Innovation slowed. Strategy collapsed. Resources were wasted on ego-driven battles. Meanwhile, a new force was rising: Nike, an American company that studied the mistakes of both Adidas and Puma and built something more modern, more agile, more global. Nike understood storytelling, it understood youth culture. It understood aspiration. While the Dassler empires fought over the past, Nike built the future. By the 1980s, both Adidas and Puma were in decline. Profits fell, market share shrank. Debt rose. The sons struggled to lead, the companies lost direction. By the end of the decade, both brands were nearing bankruptcy. The great empires built by two brothers from a laundry shed were collapsing under the weight of their own rivalry. Eventually, both families sold their stakes. The Dassler era was over. But the brand survived. New owners arrived. New strategies emerged. Adidas was reborn under the leadership of a Swiss billionaire with a talent for brand resurrection. He refocused Adidas on elite performance and cultural relevance. Predator boots dominated football. David Beckham became a global ambassador. Kobe Bryant and Andre Agassi turned Adidas into a symbol of excellence again. The acquisition of Reebok expanded its reach. The partnership with Kanye West created Yeezy, a billion-dollar fashion empire. Puma took a different path. It reinvented itself through fashion and lifestyle. It partnered with Formula One. It signed Usain Bolt. It collaborated with Alexander McQueen. It brought Rihanna on as creative director and turned Puma into a cultural force far beyond sport. Two fallen giants rose again. In 2009, more than 60 years after the split, Adidas and Puma hosted a symbolic football match in Herzogenaurach. Employees from both companies played together. The CEOs shook hands. Cameras captured the moment as a gesture of reconciliation. The feud was officially declared over. But history does not disappear. Even today, the town remains divided. Adidas headquarters still stand on one side of the river, Puma on the other. The echoes of rivalry remain embedded in the streets, the factories, the memories. Adolf and Rudolf Dassler are buried in the same cemetery, at opposite ends. Two brothers who built the greatest sports shoe company in history. Two brothers who destroyed each other. Two brothers who turned ambition into empire and family into battlefield. Adidas and Puma are no longer just brands. They are monuments to obsession. They are symbols of how power is born from rivalry, how innovation is forged in conflict, and how influence is built on the psychology of victory. They are proof that corporations are not just businesses. They are systems. They shape culture. They rewrite identity. They turn products into beliefs and shoes into flags. And somewhere, beneath the noise of stadiums and the glow of billboards, the ghosts of two brothers still walk the streets of a divided town, forever chasing a victory that was never meant to be shared.